Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here and also a proud member. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Daisy Khan. Recent terrorist attacks in Paris, Yemen, San Bernardino, and at least 7 other cities have been linked to the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, commonly known as ISIS or ISIL. After the attacks in California, presidential candidate Donald Trump called for a ban on Muslims entering the U.S. Recent polls indicate that a segment of Americans support that idea, illustrating the way in which some Americans tend to associate terrorism with Islam. Other Americans, of course, associate terrorism with homegrown hate groups. The Pew Research Center estimates there are some 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, roughly 23% of the world's population. In the context of those numbers, the root of the problem would seem to lie not with Islam, but rather with certain groups who claim to practice Islam or be motivated by religion. President Barack Obama has endured criticism over his belief that ISIS does not pose an existential threat to the U.S. In Tuesday's State of the Union, he attempted to offer reassurance that the country is expanding efforts to combat terrorism and radical extremists. And it's in this context that Daisy Khan joins us today. Born in Kashmir, India, Ms. Khan spent 25 years as an interior architect for various Fortune 500 companies. But in 2005, she began to dedicate herself full-time to community service and to building movements for positive change, both in the United States and around the globe. In 1997, she founded and served as the executive director of the American Society for Muslim Advancement, a New York-based nonprofit dedicated to strengthening an expression of Islam based on cultural and religious harmony, as well as building bridges between Muslims and the rest of the general public. Her current role as executive director of the Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality, also known as WISE, was born out of a program initially established by the American Society for Muslim Advancement in 2006. It was created to empower Muslim women to fully participate in their communities and nations and amplifying their collective voices. Khan is no stranger to Americans' fears of Muslims. In 2010, she and her husband, Faisal Abdul Rauf, planned to build Park 51 and Cordoba House, a 13-story Islamic center and mosque in Lower Manhattan, modeled after many JCCs. It was branded, though, by its critics as the Ground Zero Mosque, and the project was eventually suspended amid harsh criticism from anti-Muslim organizations and some relatives of the September 11th victims. The criticism was so extreme in some cases that it actually included death threats to Khan and her family. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Daisy Khan.
I would like to thank Dan and members of the City Club and the people, the audiences that have come here on such a cold day to listen to what I would like to share with you about the global challenges that we are facing right now in the world. But first, I also want to thank my friend, Fareed, whom I've known for many, many years and have fond memories of Chagrin Falls when actually I was an architectural designer. And I had not planned this work for myself. It somehow, the mandate fell upon me because I was married to an imam whose mosque was only 12 blocks from Ground Zero. You know, the event of 9/11 had a significant impact on me, and I just want to share for a few minutes why this work that I'm doing today directly correlates to that. I worked in the towers. I was on the 106th floor of the towers, not at the time when the towers collapsed. Before that, I spent 3.5 years in those towers. It was my office building. My husband's mosque was very close to in Lower Manhattan. Just literally, we could see the towers. And when the towers fell, you know, it was my office building, my neighborhood, my city, my state, my country that was attacked by a people that professed to do it in the name of my religion. So it was deeply personal for me, and I made a commitment and a vow, an internal vow to myself that one day I would do something about it. I didn't know how, when, or what, and then into 2010, we decided that the best way to create a counter momentum to extremism was to amplify the voices of the moderate Muslims whose voices were getting drowned out by the extremist voices, and that is when we proposed that community center. And of course, those of you who've lived in New York City, real estate is very tiny, and it was a function of where the building was available, not a function of us wanting to go close to it. So that is kind of the backdrop. And I have always been concerned about extremists hijacking our religion, our great religion. And today we're living in extremely challenging times, as you all know. This nation is divided, and as I travel around the world, there is deep divisions being created by fear and being created by a group called ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram and all those other people. So what is the biggest challenge right now? The extremists are basically defining and shaping the discourse for 1.6 billion people around the world. They have alienated Western Muslims, are being recruited at very high rates. Muslims lack information, and many people say, why aren't Muslims calling for a reformation? It's not reformation that we are after, it's lack of information that is preventing us from standing up for what Islam really stands for. They lack information about extremist ideology and how extremists have gone about recruiting people and why they have succeeded so much. Perception of Western Muslims at an all-time low, largely attributed to the lack of Muslim response to terrorism, which ultimately has given rise to Islamophobia, and you have seen the drumbeats of this with the recent with Trump and everybody else. And tonight, there's going to be a debate. I guarantee you Muslims will be mentioned negatively at least 10 times in the debate. So we know very well how this is impacting us at the home front here. The global landscape of terrorism, just to show you a chart of how, I don't know if you can see this, but you can see that, in 2000, the numbers were, maybe 4,000, and 2013, we are looking at numbers like 16,000 that have died at the hands of terrorist activities. More than 80% of terrorist attacks victims are Muslims, and this is important to remember. And you will also see the countries where most people are affected, Iraq being the highest, and of course, if we are planning to update this chart, and you will see now Syria is also at a very, it's just as high as Iraq. So the numbers are climbing. 80% of Muslims are their victims, and we Muslims, this is why we feel an urgent need to do something about it. You will see, this is a chart which shows you that individuals who have traveled from so many different parts of the world, almost from 100 different countries, are somehow flocking to join the caliphate. And so it's no one country, and no one is immune. Somehow they have managed to convince people across geographies to join them, and we will show you how they're doing that, so you'll have a better understanding. The Daesh, which is also another, their true original name of ISIS was Daesh, supporters play on the frustrations of young men and women present life in the Islamic State as an opportunity to fight for a righteous cause. That is how they are presenting themselves. These men, well, also men and women, and offers second and third generation immigrants from Islamic nations, but increase in Islamophobia in the West helps to exacerbate alienation from their national identity. So this is why you're seeing some younger Muslim from Western nations, particularly Europe and Australia, joining them. Recruiters identify disaffected and socially isolated young people, both male and female, and work to provide these vulnerable individuals with a sense of community and purpose. And this is why we say that it's not the poor, not the disaffected. There are many, many types of people that join them across economics, across nationalities. So there's no one type of person. And so that's why the profiling that we do in the US simply does not work, because there is no one profile. There are many, many reasons why people join. Recruiters extol the virtues of Islam and provide access to material promoting their extreme interpretation of its teachings. When I say they extol the virtues of Islam, they actually extol their own brand of Islam, and they couch it as if it's Islam. So if you don't know much about your religion, you can easily be fooled into thinking that it's Islam. So what is the solution? In 2009, we conducted a poll amongst 300 young Muslim leaders around the globe from 77 nations, and we asked them the question of who's responsible for combating extremism in your own communities. And look at what they said: a local community, religious leaders, and family. That is what Muslims felt, and that is where the responsibility lies. And then in 2015, we conducted a poll here in the United States, and we asked a similar question to American Muslims. And we said, over the next 5 years, please rate how much emphasis should be placed on the following counter-extremism efforts. And you can see the chart on the right is all the way the highest one, which is, I think, 83%, and the next one is diplomacy. They said, we should really increase our diplomacy. We should increase our foreign policy. We should focus on our foreign policy, diplomacy. And then you will see the lowest is military. So Muslims feel that military operations are actually not succeeding. In fact, they're having a blowback effect. So what are we Muslims now doing based on the enormity of the situation? We have decided that it's really important for us to inform the public and to create general awareness amongst the American public as well as the Muslim constituents around the United States, around the globe, as to what this threat really is. So our objective is to empower Muslims with the knowledge and tools needed to stand against extremism and to develop narratives of peace. How are we doing it? We are creating a community-led multidisciplinary approach. Past approaches, which is war on terror, have not worked, primarily because we have focused entirely on the kinetics approach, which is, bombing. We have focused entirely on security measures, which is very important and necessary, and intelligence. And we have also focused on finances, but what we have not focused on, which is the missing piece of the puzzle, the motivator, the driver, which is the ideology. How is it that so many people can be fooled into joining this group? So ideology is the key factor, and no government can take on the ideology. It is a responsibility of the community, religious leaders, and people like us who have to step up and say, this is Islam and this is terrorism, and de-link the two. So it is a collaborative project with 40 Muslim stakeholders. We have invited women, youth, imams, think tanks, scholars, academics, educators, peace champions to provide information into this community guide. So what is this community guide going to address? First, it's going to analyze the growth of extremist groups in detail, so people have an understanding of how did they come about, what is the backdrop which has allowed them to grow so rapidly, who are they, what do they represent, their numbers, their tactics, and so on and so forth. The second section is going to address the state of Islam in America, multiple articles that will be written about the rise of Islamophobia, the erosion of civil liberties, how that impacts the community, the struggle for identity, the kinds of things that most American public may not be aware of, but it is your chance to read directly from Muslims how they feel about Islam being shaped in America and how certain things are setting back the shaping of institution building. For instance, in our case, we were trying to build an institution that could have been replicated in every state, just like the JCC. And it was interrupted, and it was stopped. And that institution building, when you interrupt that, you interrupt the integration of this minority community. We will be going in great detail with the extremist ideology, what it is. We will be going in great detail about the recruitment strategy and recruitment tactics that extremists use. We will be talking specifically about women. Why have women chosen to join ISIS? What is the lure? How are they being convinced? Women who are nurturers, usually peacemakers, usually conflict, trying to resolve conflict, and yet they are being convinced to join groups like ISIS. We know many who have returned and have talked about horror experiences, but why? What is the lure for women? Why did they join them? Then we are going to explain in great detail how everything that ISIS teaches is actually against the core teachings of Islam, which are peace, reconciliation, and we will have multiple articles listing that as well. We will be talking about Muslim heroes, because one of the things that ISIS do really well is they convince you that, you know, the lack of heroism and the lack of glory. So when they invite you to join them, they're basically saying that, you know, you will restore your past glory and you will be the hero by joining us. So the lack of heroic image in the Muslim world and amongst Muslims is very important. So we are highlighting some current day heroes and some past heroes who have fought similar wars, who have been revolutionaries and have fought these wars, you know, using the kind of rules of engagement of warfare. We will be empowering communities with the knowledge that many adults are lacking, which is how social media platforms are being used by extremist groups, and very, very successfully, and the kinds of apps that are being used to communicate with one another, so much so that even law enforcement is not able to see what is going on, because there are all these new privacy apps that are coming out that actually, guess who's taking advantage of them? Not people like you and me, but really the extremist group. So they are millennials. Many of them are millennials. And as you know, millennials are totally connected, and so they are using these platforms very effectively. Then we will be talking about Muslim condemnations of terrorism, because we are kind of blue in the face when Americans keep saying, why aren't Muslims speaking out? We took the effort of actually culling all the condemnations and statements that Muslims have issued over time. And we have approximately 300 such statements, including major fatwas that have been issued against these terrorist groups, so that Americans will actually see how much Muslims have done. This is just a quote that is a very important quote from Prophet Muhammad: the ink of a scholar is more sacred or precious than the blood of a martyr. It shows you this is what he said, and that is why we are taking the ink and the book, and we are publishing a guide so that we can guide our people using the words of the Prophet to restore our faith. We're going to take a quick peek inside. Obviously, it's 200 pages long guide. I can't go into every detail within the time constraints that we have, but this just shows you at the very bottom left, usually what the psychological motivators are for extremists. So one of the biggest psychological motivator is that somebody may be just seeking purpose in life, and as you know, many millennials want to change the world. I mean, I have so many millennials that come to my office, and each one wants to change the world. They're all interns and staff. They're all like, I want to change the world. So similarly, many of the people who are seeking meaning in life, looking for justice, or looking to increase their own spirituality or their path of a spiritual path, they somehow get online, because there's so much information online. There are 9,600 websites, 60,000 Twitter accounts. The numbers have exploded just within the last 4 or 5 years. So it's not that difficult to click ISIS on your computer and find a lot of places where you can find information. And there is not a single counter to counter that. So you get pulled into it, and immediately you have a friend who's speaking to you on Facebook, who may be communicating with you on Twitter, and you get manipulated into thinking that joining ISIS will make you a better Muslim or give you meaning in life. Then immediately you are presented with a pessimism about the current situation. So depending on who you are, if you're Western Muslims, you might be told, look at what Trump is doing to you. Or you might be told, you know, they don't want you there. You know, they're asking you to get out of your nation. And if you're a Muslim living in Muslim majority countries, you are presented with all the reasons why you need to leave your country. You don't have justice, there's corruption, there's authoritarianism, and many of us can agree on most of these things. So this is how they lure you in, you know, understanding what your own issues are in your own life. Then they give you a sense of hope and empowerment. Join us and everything will get wonderful. Then they present you with this kind of belief that the end of war is near. They have some obscure things from theology that they have pulled out, which indicates that the world is coming to an end. You know, when the Prophet was asked, when is the end of the world, he said, the only thing you should worry about is your own last day. So this is, our Prophet said that, but somehow these people know when the last day is, so they're telling everybody the last days are here, so really you need to focus on the afterlife. Then they justify their violence by saying, look at all the enemies we have. they will show the drone attacks, they will show all the atrocities that have happened to Muslims all over the world, and there's plenty of images that one can see and get shocked by, and so they say, we have many enemies and we have to fight, and that's why we need to also fight, and so we're not committing violence, we're just in a war. Then caliphate is seen as the only solution. This is the utopia. This is where they tell you, and this is what distinguishes them differently than Al-Qaeda. They basically tell you, listen, we are creating something new. Muslims have suffered over the years. We have lost our past glory. We're recreating the caliphate, and there's going to be a new Islam that will emerge. So join us, be in the rebuilding of the nation. I'm going to go quickly now because my time is running out. Basically, they overgeneralize everything. They decontextualize our scriptures. It's literal, biased, simplistic, almost illogical when you read it. So deviant that one can't even, if I show this to imams, they nod their head and they say, we've never seen this stuff in our books. What is this? They disregard 1,400 years of Islamic history. They somehow seem to only have like the first 3 caliphs, and they focus on that. That is why they think that Shia are, they should be dispensed with. So they have their own theory. They distort Islamic values of charity, good works. They say that's for later. Right now, we have to just commit violence. They are into labeling. They use a lot of labels. They've used the black flag. They take all the core concepts of Islam, many things that Muslims are familiar with that really hit us here at the gut level, and they take all of those and they distort them ever so slightly to benefit their own this thing, and I'll show you a quick chart of that. And then finally, they really promote hate against the other, and the other is anybody who's outside of their little fold. They have an absolutist thinking. They believe they are the chosen ones. They are rejectionist, exclusivist, and this is the same sort of psychology that other extremist groups have. They are the chosen ones, and they're fighting in God's cause, and they're ostracized by mainstream society, so, come and join us. They have a very strong anti-Western sentiment. They think that the West is a perpetrator of oppression, and Islam has been under siege for centuries, so therefore it's your obligation to lift us out of this misery. They discount all positive. Non-Muslim lifestyles must not be tolerated, and it's one of the things and one of the reasons why they can get Western Muslims to join them is because they will say, what are you doing living in the West, where there's alcohol and all this other stuff. They just use buzzwords to get you. And then, as I mentioned before, end of times, fulfilling God's plan is part of they convince you that you're part of something greater plan for yourself. And then there is a desire to establish modern-day caliphate under which true Islam will flourish. These are the concepts of Islam that they distort. The foundation is something called al-wala wal-bara, which some Muslims are familiar with. Is basically loyalty and disloyalty, which also translates into us versus them. And this is everywhere when you have an extremist mindset. It's us versus them, and us is a small group, and them is everybody else that needs to be hated and disliked. So that is the foundation of their thinking. Then these are the methods that they use, the concept of ummah, the concept of takfir. Ummah is the worldwide Muslim community. Muslims believe that they belong to a worldwide Muslim community. Well, they believe that the ummah is only them, that they are the true inheritors of that, and everybody else has gone. Somehow the rest of us have become deviant, so they are the true ones. So when you join them, you're part of a select few that are the true inheritors of the faith, and everybody else, every other Muslim is gone. So then when every other Muslim is gone, takfir, labeling others as infidels, also labeling Muslims as infidels, and this is why 80% of Muslims are the ones that are victims of their terror, because they have justified killing fellow Muslims. They tell you to give their bay'ah, which is their allegiance to the grand mufti, or whatever he calls himself, the caliph. And once again, they took the notion of bay'ah, which which people had given their commitment and allegiance to Prophet when he moved from Mecca to Medina. They take that little story and they say, well, didn't the Prophet do that? And so they ask you, and they make it as if it is a commitment on every Muslim to give bay'ah to the caliph. And then once you've given that, they ask you, you better move from where you live, because it's an obligation for you to make this hijrah, to make this journey
from oppression to freedom, and so they ask you to join them. And then, of course, once you make the journey over there, you have to struggle, you have to fight your enemies, so you have to create jihad. And they have redefined jihad as meaning only killing. And even that, the killing that they do, they go against all rules. Then if you are going to commit jihad, you have to be a martyr, and the only way you can be a martyr is for you to commit suicide. Once again, those of you who are Muslims in the room know what Islam says about suicide. It's completely forbidden. And then ultimately, the utopia is we are going to live in an Islamic state, and it's going to be a beautiful place, and everything will be restored. So, for instance, what we would do in our community guide is we would take each of these concepts and we would refute each and every one of them and show you their brand and then what real Islam stands for. So the American public is aware that this is not Islam, that this is actually a twisted version of some ideology, and also fellow Muslims can speak about this more effectively. So refuting jihad, a call to war can only be made from a publicly recognized caliph or leader. Because they were nobody, and they knew that this is the rules of warfare, guess what they did? They took a piece of geography, and the guy declared himself a caliph, because without that, he could do nothing. So they're very smart. They're not stupid people. And war must be declared. No secret and clandestine use of force is allowed. So these are the rules of warfare within Islam, agreed upon over 1,400 years, but yet you know that they don't declare war. They use clandestine force. Disregarding prohibited actions at times of war are the hallmarks of terrorists, and these are the rules. Attacking non-combatants and civilians is not permitted. Arbitrarily destroying property is not permitted. Committing suicide is forbidden. Engaging in cheating and treachery is forbidden. Committing rape is forbidden. Mistreating prisoners of war, you've seen what they do with prisoners, they burn them alive. And terrorizing populations is forbidden, and waging war against fellow Muslims is forbidden. So these are all the things that are forbidden, and yet they somehow justify them, and these are their hallmarks. This is a very long slide, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but this is just to show you how they have a very sophisticated way of luring you. So there are almost 16 steps to how they get you from step 1 to step 2, and it's all about engaging you online. So much of it is done through Facebook and Twitter, where they talk to you and they start getting you. So the first is, they want to know if you're interested in Islam, then they promote their own brand of Islam to you. They have a whole production of books and videos and their own production machine. They tell you to maintain secrecy about their relationship because enemies don't want the real Islam to flourish, but really what they're trying to do is distance you from those who love you. Muslims around the world are persecuted and are treated unjustly, so therefore you have an obligation to help them. And then jihad is the only way to alleviate the suffering, that God finds armed jihad and martyrdom superior to all other actions. Jihad is an obligation. Wage jihad against infidels, so anybody who is now outside their fold, including fellow Muslims. Preserve your purity and stay away from non-believers, which means that you really now have to create a firewall between your friends, your allies, your co-workers, and all those other people that you know. Hate anyone who's not a true believer like us. Most Muslim states are apostates. They don't practice true Islam. You must be prepared to engage in armed jihad against non-Muslim powers. So this would be in the case of the West. They would tell you it's okay for you to take action within your own country, and they would convince you of that. Then you must migrate to a region that practices the true Islam, so come and join us. Migrating to a region, true Islam is essential for your faith. You must give a pledge of allegiance. We talked about that. And then, of course, the last one is breaking this pledge is an unforgivable sin in Islam. They either go to hell or you go to heaven. So many people who go to the other side, it's really hard to return from there because either they are killed, beheaded. You've heard news stories of that. So this is the video of how ordinary person would be recruited. So there's a young man sitting here, college student, just somehow connected with an ISIS recruiter. He's telling him, I'm well. How did you do on your exam? Very good. Alhamdulillah, which means, thanks to God. There was only one tough question, but I nailed it. Everything else, mashallah, mashallah, good for you. Glory be to God. Well done. I knew you were going to do well. So then the kid responds, thanks. And then he says, my mother took me to McDonald's afterwards. I was craving a Big Mac. McDonald's? The food of the infidels? Haram, the guy responds. Brother, this is the taqwa killer, this mother of yours obviously doesn't want your best if she's... Anyway, listen to me closely. He's trying to get him. Keep your distance away from your family and friends. They are kafir, infidel, and unbelievers of the correct way of living Islam. Staying close with them will taint your piety. Isolate yourself by putting one brick around yourself at a time to protect yourself and your faith from your unbelieving family. Kid is confused now. What do I do?
Father, you were told to distance yourself from your mother. Do you know what the Quran has to say about a mother?
No.
It is written in the Quran,
So
chapter
he seeks
31
the
of
advice
Luqman.
of a spiritual leader.
Let me show
Where
you.
He can go to somebody.
His mother bears him with faintings upon faintings, and his weaning
So the
takes
sound
2
is not
years.
good, but he's telling him verses
Here
of the
it is written,
Quran which
"Give
talk
thanks
about
to
respect
me,
of parents and
God,
what your mother really constitutes,
and to
who
thy
your
parents."
mother is, and the importance of motherhood.
Let me tell you a story about the Prophet, Rasulullah.
And then he tells him the story of the
Once
Prophet.
a young man like yourself came to the Prophet
A
and
young man
declared his
came to the
desire
Prophet and said, I want
I
to
want
do
to do
jihad.
jihad, he said. Why? Asked the Prophet.
Why? Asked the Prophet.
Because when I die fighting, I want to go to paradise.
When I die fighting, I want to go to paradise.
Do you have a mother? The Prophet asked.
Do you have a mother? The Prophet
Yes,
asked.
he replied.
Yes.
Go serve your mother,
Go
and you
serve
will
your
find
mother.
paradise there.
And you will find paradise there. So this kid is saved because he found somebody who could guide him. But many people do not have access to people who can guide them the right way. So our plan for this community guide, ladies and gentlemen, is we have already finished the research and publication and preview of the guide in 2015. We are launching a website. We are doing a national and social media campaign and beginning a national tour. I'm pleased to tell you that in 2016, the City Club is the first place where I'm actually launching this tour. So. We're going to continue this journey to 50 states. We're going to try and speak to every person that we can speak to, Muslims, fellow Americans, and everybody that really needs to understand how we need to change the discourse, not only about Islam, but also about how extremists have hijacked our great religion. And I thank you very much, and I think that we are at a question and answer session.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we're enjoying a forum featuring Daisy Khan, founder and executive director of the Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. We encourage you to organize your questions for Ms. Khan now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. If you're joining us via our webcast, you're invited to tweet us a question. You can tweet it at the City Club. If you're also shy and you're in the room, you can tweet it at the City Club and we'll work it in all the same. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via the web stream provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many other radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Production, distribution, and broadcast of City Club programs are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us next Friday, January 22nd, as we welcome Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, CEO of Goodwill of Northern New England, and she also happens to be the granddaughter of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. We'll have a discussion with her about the importance of creating second chances for people who want to work. For more information about any of our upcoming programs or our past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's forum is the Ibn Sina Endowed Forum at the City Club of Cleveland, made possible by the members of the Ibn Sina Society. We thank you all very much for your support. And our community partners for today's program are the Niagara Foundation and the Northeast Ohio Consortium for Middle East Studies. We thank you very much for your partnership. Our hospitality partner for today's forum is the Metropolitan at the Nine Hotel. Thank you very much for your support. Additionally, we welcome students to today's program from Hawkins School. Student participation is made possible by the Mary Jane Spar and Charles E. Spar Charitable Trust. Could the students please stand to be recognized? Students, of course, are invited to ask questions along with all of you. It's time to return to Ms. Khan for our traditional City Club Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding our microphones today are our Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and our Marketing and Outreach Fellow, Faye Walker. Let's have the first question, please.
Thank you very much. Quite impressive and very robust. But I want to ask something of a critical question, which is that don't you risk in making this argument, and particularly that video, by putting terrorism and Islam together, the argument that it's ideology sounds a lot like the argument is that that terrorism is a result of something that happened in a religion. I mean, and then I think there's a lot of critical perspectives that that's not true. In this case, nor is it true whether we talked about Northern Ireland or other parts of the world. And the other issue is more specifically in American context, which is you started out talking about anti-Muslim views, and in American history, whether it's anti-Semitism or other forms of racism, you know, part of the solution has been education, right? That's part of it. But the other part of it has been resistance, which is to say to turn the lens on why are people anti-Muslim in certain parts of the U.S., or how is racism more broadly used, right? So the comparison is right now we have a group of armed individuals in Oregon that are occupying a facility. The leader of that group is also a member of a very large religious organization in the United States. That doesn't get any play, probably because it doesn't do any work for someone who might be a political entrepreneur and want to use that. So I guess the issue is this is good, but we're talking about American Muslims. This is an American problem if we're talking about anti-religious, racist views in this country. Shouldn't the lens also be turned on them?
I think the war is not between religions. It's between the moderates of all religions and extremists of all religions. And that is why the psychological drivers, if you take the psychological drivers and you superimpose them on the extremist groups that you're talking about, it's the same sort of mindset. The difficulty we have is that religions have always been challenged in America, and I don't have to tell you this, but many of you are academics in this room. So Catholics face the talking points against Muslims are the same exact talking points that they had against the Catholics, and then the same talking points against Jews. So we know that the Muslim community right now is going through a struggle of acceptance, general acceptance into the framework of America. But the difficulty we have as a community is, although we are a robust community, law-abiding citizens, most of the way we are shaped and the perception that is shaped about us has to do with what is coming into our living rooms from abroad. So 9/11 impacted us not because American Muslims did anything, but because of what happened from Al-Qaeda and the attack on the mainland here. So the way the perceptions are shaped about Muslims have to do with what's happening in the global level, in the global scene. This is why we have to take our response globally and not just address it locally. I think that why we have decided to focus on delinking Islam from extremism, I think the first step is actually acknowledging that terrorist groups actually use our theology. They abuse our theology. And they have taken it, and that is why they're able to mobilize so many large groups of people. When we don't do that, we get accused of just whitewashing everything, because for years Muslims have said that we are a religion of peace, and we know that 1.6 billion people just peacefully living and coexisting. But there is a small group of people that have decided to use religion to further their political agenda. And this is something that has happened in the history with other religions as well. This is not just unique to Muslims. And I think that the only way, I believe, we will de-link it in the minds of Americans is if we actually show how extremist groups are abusing the religion of Islam. And only then can Muslims stand tall and speak with confidence as to why this is not Islam. And this is why we've addressed this in such a profound and deep way. It's not to say that this has, anything to do per se with Islam, but when I showed you the concepts that they distort, they lifted them out of our books and they twisted them just so that they can fool people into believing that it is Islam. Thank you.
Do you see any reason for changes in our immigration policy at all?
I think that it depends on who is going to be our next president. People overseas, I was just in India for 3 weeks for a family wedding, and everybody's planning to come to the United States and for another wedding that we have. We South Asians, we cross oceans and mountains to go to weddings. So this is part of our tradition, is we just can't not go to a wedding. So 50 people are coming, and they're all petrified what's going to happen at the U.S. Embassy. Am I going to be denied? Do I fit? They're all asking me, do I fit the profile? I said, yeah, you definitely fit the profile. You're 30 years old. Get rid of your beard. Look a little clean-shaven. But there is a fear all over the world that Muslims are not going to get entry into the United States, that they'll be denied visas, student visas will be denied. Ordinary Muslims, one Muslim, a very well-to-do Muslim, went to the embassy to get his visa, and he was asked, are you married? And he said, yes. Do you have children? Yes. And he was being asked all these questions, and he was coming here for business visa. And he was fretting it, and he thought that, why are they asking me all these questions? I said, no, they're not asking you all this. They just want to see you sweat, to see if you have anything to hide. And he goes, oh, that's what it is. If somebody had told me that, I wouldn't have thought. He really thought there was something in his own history. So yeah, the laws are getting tougher, and I just hope that we do not shut the borders, because this is a land of immigrants, and many of us have made great contributions to the society, and we're proud of it. We love this country, and I hope that we will live up to our ideal and not fall short.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
My name is Joseph Patrick Meisner, and I'm an attorney here in Cleveland. And as in my religion of being a Roman Catholic, so within Islam, there's a strong urging to get out and convert the entire world. I had a friend today that I invited to come here, and even my offer of paying for his dinner wouldn't induce him to come, because he felt that the ultimate goal of everyone who is a Muslim is to have everyone in the world to become a Muslim. And even people such as my hero, one of my heroes, Fethullah Gulen, and even yourself with your PEN program, that you are part of the soft approach to converting everybody. Yeah. So my friend wouldn't come because he didn't even want to be subject to such a nice soft approach. Anyway, what do you say to tell people that it is not a question of everybody becoming a Roman Catholic or everybody becoming a Muslim? Thank you.
Yeah, so a friend of ours once said, we don't get it. We Muslims have the worst reputation in the world. We have the worst PR in the world. But yet there are all these people that keep converting by the drones. Nobody gets it. So I think that, first of all, there is a reason for why people are converting to Islam, or you see a very high rate of conversion to Islam. It has nothing to do with Muslims converting them. It has to do with the curiosity that people have, because there is so much that people are talking about Islam on, books were flying off the shelves after 9/11. So there is a general curiosity. So what happens is a young spiritual aspirant says, you know what, I really want to know what this religion has to say, and then they fall upon the Quran and then discover it's really not different from what they were brought up to, and maybe they sometimes find their path through it. I can tell you that I don't know any American Muslim personally that is actively recruiting and trying to convert anybody. We have so many problems. We don't have time to convert people because, believe me, then we would have a new problem in our mosque. We wouldn't know how to deal with them. But there are people coming regularly into mosques who just want to accept Islam, who on their own voluntarily have chosen this path. We don't have a notion that we have to proselytize anybody who's a believer, because our theology says that there are people of the book, and they are recognized as being legitimate, and there's no reason for us to try to convert people who are already believers. There is a small group of people, Jamaat Islamiyah, who actively go and try and convert fellow Muslims, to their brand of Islam. They exist even in Christianity. So what I'm saying is that it's a myth that Muslims are out to convert anybody. And I was accused of stealth, being a stealth, that I had some other hidden agenda, and that I was dressed in a way that I would integrate very easily. So I actually go in there into groups like the City Club and try and convert all of you. It's far from the truth. We don't have any such agenda. If Muslims were so organized, we wouldn't be in such a mess. We are a democratic religion. Everybody is a leader of his own mosque. We have no central authority other than maybe in some traditions, in the Shia tradition and in Sufi traditions, where there is a hierarchy and there is a spiritual leader. But really, there is nobody sitting there and saying, let's convert everybody else. There are people who are trying to promote their brand of Islam, actively promoting their brand of Islam. And that has been going on from the Gulf for many years, where a certain brand of Islam, Wahhabism, was being promoted actively within Muslim communities, not within the West. That's my humble answer, and I hope you'll accept it.
Hello. First, I'd like to make a comment about Donald Trump. Even though his view is unusual and way outside middle America, President Roosevelt, with the consent of Congress, interred the Japanese. President Jimmy Carter, during the Iranian hostage situation, had all the Iranians that were visiting his country submit visas or come and say where they were. They were deported. So it is very unusual. But I, as a Christian, know that we have our fanatics. I'm sure in the Jewish religion, there are fanatics. And in the Muslimism, there are fanatics. I think what we need to do is have the mainstream America, mainstream Islam, mainstream everybody says, these views are unacceptable. Being my age, I can remember the Christian saying about kill a commie for Christ.
I think that was a comment, right? Well, I think that some of the things that happened in the past in the history of America were sort of contained to America because we were living in a different world. I would find it really hard-pressed that such a thing could happen to Muslims today without repercussions from the globe. We're living in a very different time where information is flowing so easily. And when I was in India, I was getting more stuff from WhatsApp. I was learning everything about what's happening in America in nanoseconds. So if you were going to intern Muslims and round them up, and then we have a footprint in so many Muslim countries right now, a military footprint, there would be a reaction. And so I think it would be highly irresponsible to do anything like that. Already there has been so much conversation that has been precipitated around the globe about shutting the doors to people who want to come here with valid visas. I can't imagine people being interned or being put into some kind of camps in the United States without repercussions, because each and every one of us have families. We have relationships. We represent countries that have diplomatic ties with the United States, and it's just not possible in the world that we live in today.
Thank you, Ms. Khan, for your remarks today. It is my understanding that jihad is not a holy war, but rather a personal struggle that one has to maintain his or her relationship to Islam. But it has become synonymous with terrorism and terrorists. What can we do, if I am correct, what can we do to break that connection and go back to the original meaning of the word?
So the Prophet, when he came back from a war, was asked, he said to a group of, he had to fight many wars because he was always being attacked and being assassinated. So these were not wars, they were small battles that he was waging. And once he came back, and everybody was weary and tired, and he said, we have to wage the greater jihad. And they were so exhausted, and they said, another war? And he says, no, this is the greatest jihad, the jihad against yourself, which is the struggle against your own ego, And so this is the definition, the greatest jihad is the definition of self-correction, because the Quran says that a condition of a people does not change unless they change what is in themselves. So the human ego can bring, can enlighten a human being, and the human ego can become pharaonic and declare himself God. And this is why we see this kind of problems in the world, because certain people have self-declared themselves caliph and are acting like they are God. So this is just like a modern day pharaonic image that we see. It has to do with people not being connected to their own sort of spiritual self. And this is the struggle at the individual level that people have to do. Jihad is permitted. You are allowed to fight in self-defense, especially if you are being prevented from practicing your faith. So in the case of America, if they didn't allow me to pray, or somebody said I couldn't fast during the month of Ramadan, or I couldn't give charity, then that might be grounds for me taking action. But of course, the rules of engagement are I can't fight against those who didn't harm me. I can't. So I also have to fight those who actually directly fought me. So there are, Islam is a religion of law as well. We have a whole criminal law. We have, many different areas of law. So each one of them have their own rules of how do you engage in warfare, who do you fight. You can only fight an enemy that's fighting you. You can't just go out there and fight everybody else. So that it's education. And we have, in this community guide, we have actually laid out 2 very large articles about jihad and what it actually means, and how Muslims and how American audiences can think about it differently. Thank you.
Hello. Yes. I would ask every U.S. taxpayer to apologize to the Muslim world for the many bombs we've dropped and the torture and the rape that occurred at Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, bombs on Iraq, Afghanistan, drone attacks. This is state terror, and all terror is abhorred, I would say. And so what relationship is state terror to this other terrorism that we're seeing with ISIS, please?
Well, once again, states declare war, right? So I know, but so I think the difficulty we have is around the Muslim world when America, that is a country that is known for its soft power and is loved for its soft power. So much so that people who don't even agree with the policies of America will send their children here to go to school. They will send their kids to do an MBA, even if they disagree with American foreign policy. What we have done is we've walked away from our best strengths, which is our diplomacy and our really creating a foreign policy that is relevant for today's times. And I'm not sure why we can't think outside the box when we are such great innovators. of other things, why our government is still sort of operating in that, prehistoric times. I think we need to move forward and think about how to engage the rest of the world very differently than the way we have done. And one thing that I can tell you as a Muslim is that our military power and our military engagement has had nothing but a negative effect. It has not gotten us anywhere, and it has not solved any of the problems in any of the Muslim world. I mean, we went to Afghanistan, and we have more armament there than we actually originally came in with. And that is one of the complaints that I have, is that we went into Afghanistan to demilitarize that country, to de-Talibanize that country, and to give women rights. And today, Taliban has risen, there are more arms, and women's rights are being traded left and right. So we didn't achieve anything. So I think that we need to go back to our core strength, which is diplomacy, and our soft power, and we'll be able to turn this around. And it's my regret, because we are a great nation, and we have inspired many things, and we've been the beacon of light for many in many areas, but that's not how we're seen anymore around the globe.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. Really learned a lot about the approach that you're going to be undertaking. I look forward to seeing how it goes. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about moderate Muslims, something that you mentioned a little bit more. And it's clear, of course, that a moderate Muslim would be opposed to ISIS or any form of terrorism or war. But I'm wondering if there are other values, beliefs, practices that you consider to be representative of moderate Muslims, political values, things like that, if you could expand a little bit on that.
So we don't have these terminologies that you have in sort of Christianity and Judaism, where you have the Reform, you have the Conservative, you have the Orthodox, and that is what is that's the difficulty that Americans have with Islam, is that there is no label that you can give to Muslims. So lack of that label creates the confusion. But I can tell you that the Quran does speak about moderation as being the preferred way. So God extols, says that the middle way is the better way, stay away from extremes on all sides. So it is a value that is very much promoted, and it's why majority of Muslims are moderates. They are moderate in their views, they are moderate when it comes to their religion. If I was to say, what does a moderate Muslim like me believe in, or what defines me from not the extremist, but somebody who would be more literalist Muslim, if I was to give a label, I would say that moderate Muslims regard women very highly and think that women have equal rights to men. Moderate Muslims have zero tolerance for terrorism because they don't believe it has any basis in Islam whatsoever. They believe that peace is the preferred way. In other words, they believe that we should work with Muslims, non-Muslims, and people of all religions, and they believe that all religions should be honored and respected and not disrespected, because not only are we children of Abraham, but we're also children of Adam. This is a definition that many years ago, in the Ottoman Empire and the Mughal era, when Muslims were ruling over non-Muslims, they came out with this definition that that everybody was a child of Adam. So therefore, God says in the Quran, I have conferred dignity on every person of Adam, or every child of Adam. So therefore, we have to understand that dignity lies in every human being, and that we are to honor them, including gay people, including people of all ethnicities, and Islam also fundamentally is colorblind, and we are all equal in the eyes of God. So these are some of the things, in the absence of time, that I think would be things that moderate Muslims would say, this is a value I hold. Thank you.
Sit down for just a second. I feel like she just referred to me as the absence of time. Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a forum with Daisy Khan, the founder and executive director of WISE. That's the Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. Thank you very much, Ms. Khan. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Our forum is now adjourned.